So this is our first time to meet in November. The weather's nice, but it's gotten awfully dark. And by not having met for the last 3 weeks, as it were, there was still daylight when we were here 3 weeks ago. So I welcome you in the darkness, just kind of out of the blue this evening. We continue to hear from people on the internet. Some people will call and send us something and make a comment on one of their emails, but we never find out where they're from, and so I typically don't mention their names because I don't know where they came from. But we have had Gary in San Antonio, Texas, Corbin in Akron, Ohio, Pastor Bart in Tupelo, Mississippi, John in Denver, Colorado, and Luke in St. Paul, Minnesota, that have been watching one of the videos and have contacted us to let them know they are, and so we welcome them, and others that are watching us, of course, on YouTube or on the church's website, as well as every one of us here this evening. So we start this evening. This is chapter 6. I think it's week 7 of us being together, but it's chapter 6. And we're ready to make our comments, our fourth comment about the tree that we have chosen. Our fourth comment on the tree of knowledge as the judgmental tree. This would be in the material you just walked in and were handed this evening, is where we are. What, page 136? Yes. Okay. Previously, now back in October, in our discussion of the serpent's tree, we noted 4 characteristics or points of view from which to approach understanding the world of the serpent's tree, the world that is caused by this tree. We've already discussed the first 3. Number 1 was the tree of knowledge is a serpentine tree that gives us a knowledge by division. It divides everything. The tree of knowledge, secondly, is a sensate tree. It gives us knowledge based on and from the 5 senses. Our last time we met, we dealt with the topic that the tree of knowledge is a seductive tree that gives us knowledge that appeals to us. It is an appealing, attractive. And so we come this evening to our fourth perspective. The tree of knowledge is a judgmental tree that gives us the ability to decide what is good and evil. That's where we start this evening then, and brings us up to date. Living dirt. We must remember that we are living dirt. We are a handful of dirt into which the breath of life was breathed. I have here again from Genesis, printed the Septuagint in Greek, and you can actually see underneath each one of the words, the text there in Genesis 2:7, how God molded the man from the dirt, from the earth, and creatively blessed and breathed into them face to face the breath of life, and he became a living psyche, is the actual word in the Greek language, became a living psyche. And of course we have a smoother translation. God molded the man from the dirt of the earth, and face to face, creatively blessedly breathed into him the breath of life, and the man became a living psyche. At the very least, we are dirt that, through no act of our own, became living dirt. We have 2 parts. We have the visible, the dirt. We also have something that's invisible. We don't know what it is, but we know when we have it because it makes us alive. And when we don't have it, we're dirt that's no longer alive. We know there's something between just dirt and being living dirt. So we are more than living dirt. The story does not say we became living dirt. We are something new. We are something more than dirt and something more than living dirt. We are a living psyche. We are not a non-material inner life occupying a body of dirt. Somehow, the dirt and life are mixed together into something called a psyche. I'm not trying to use the Greek language here. It's just, someone called it a soul, but boy, that gets really sticky. And what in the world does that mean? So let's just go with the word that we don't know what it means. We are a living psyche, and let it go at that. We're not just some living creature housed inside like a snail inside of a shell. We are not just a turtle that has a shell that we're attached to, but somehow is totally separate from us. We're not just dirt, and we're not just dirt that's now alive. Somehow we are now a living psyche, something different. So you can't just take something out and all the dirt was just a housing that was there. We are a whole person with two functioning portions. Our non-material portion discerns the distinction between the temporary and the eternal, between that which is apprehended by contemplation and that which is known by the bodily senses. Our bodily portion, with its five senses, notices the physical world, and in particular, especially knows the difference between bodily pleasure and pain. We are a single whole with the capacity to know the non-material as well as the capacity to know the material. The choice between the two trees in paradise is a choice between a world shaped by non-material realities and a world shaped only by bodily pleasure and pain. That's the choice. If one wants a world that confines himself solely to discriminating between pleasure and pain, then he eats from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and having the ability, based on what sustains the body, he embraces pleasure as something good and rejects what is painful as evil. Adam and Eve chose the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Believing in the ability of our body's five senses to detect and know pleasure and pain, mankind chose to believe in our own power to separate pleasure from pain, and chose to create a world, our own heaven on earth, filled only with pleasure, without in any way experiencing pain. I'm not politicizing our comments, but the creed upon which the United States is built is found in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, pleasure, the avoidance of pain, creating our own version of heaven on earth. The experience of pleasure. The serpent brought Eve to beware of the sensation of pleasure, the discovery that something was pleasing to look at, that some things created a feeling of happiness and euphoria. Eve suddenly realized and intensive sensory perception delightfully filling her as she pondered the beauty of the fruit of the tree. As the tree now created the knowledge of, the awareness of pleasure within her. It was the experience of pleasure that Eve offered to Adam. Here, taste this. Experience this. The fruit was not only pleasurable to see, it was even more intensely pleasurable to enter into and be consumed by the pleasure itself. It was the all-intensive experience of pleasure itself to the body senses, that led mankind to abandon all other modes of living, all other methods or ways or matrix, to pursue a life and create a world based on the human body, its senses, and its experience of pleasure. You see, we're back here just staying in the garden, staying in paradise, exploring the beginning and how we got where we are with these choices. The mind of the flesh replaced the intellect of the invisible, the contemplation capability of the invisible, as the ruling arbiter of knowledge. All knowledge was bodily known knowledge. All knowledge is bodily known from this tree. That's how we know from the senses. The serpent's tree now taught us its kind of knowledge, its way of knowing. Pleasure is good, pain is evil. Choose pleasure, avoid pain. Rules to live by. The serpent's tree activated more than the experience of pleasure. It activated the awareness of pleasure. It activated this sense that it's there. I can spot it. I am experiencing pleasure. This is fun. This is good. This is pleasurable. See, you're aware that it is. And the memory of that which we became aware of is knowledge. The memory of the experience became our knowledge of pleasure. We did it, it felt good, and we remember it, and because memory is knowledge. That's what we know. I know I liked it, or I know I didn't like it. Knowledge is based on the memory of how our body responded to something. Experiencing something as pleasurable is one thing. To be aware that I like this, that I find this pleasurable, is a step removed from the experience itself. I'm remembering it. I know that I do. I look forward to getting to eat that cobbler again. The memory of awareness is knowledge. I know that I like that. I remember the experience and how it made me feel. There's a whole lot of commercials on TV that advertise to the feeling and our nostalgia of that past event of doing that, particularly at Christmas time, and the nostalgic repeating of traditions. Likewise, the human body experiences pain, knows that which is not pleasurable, but hurtful. The intellect of the invisible discerns the difference between life and death. That's the other tree. We're going to get to it. The intellect, the other side of knowing, knows the difference between life and death. This way of knowing from this tree knows the difference between pleasure and pain. One tree knows the difference between life and death. The other tree knows the difference between it feels good or it hurts. The intellect knows the difference between life and death. The mind of the flesh, based on the experience of the body, has the power to discriminate between bodily pleasure and pain, or rather, it persuades sensation to embrace pleasure. Leave that alone, grab that. While rejecting pain. Pleasure is to be sought. Mankind, having chosen the bodily tree, is now confined to a life of deciding between pleasure and pain. Pleasure was to be pursued, pain was to be avoided. Good and evil are values placed on the experience of pleasure and pain. Pleasure was deemed good, pain was deemed bad. Experientially, existentially, the serpent's tree was the tree of the experience of pleasure and pain. Epistemologically, in terms of knowledge, it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the knowledge of pleasure and pain. Opposite sides of the same coin. By now, in our extended discussion of the tree of knowledge of good and evil over these several weeks, it is quite obvious that there is a great difference between the two trees and between their natural powers of discrimination. One discriminates or tells the difference between life and death, the other between pain and pleasure. That is, one tree focuses on and recognizes the difference between the invisible and the visible, the difference between that which gives life and that which gives death, while the second tree focuses on and defines the difference between good and evil. Our discussion will soon bring us to part 2, the tree not chosen. But let us not be in a hurry or grow impatient, lest in our haste to go forward, we allow to remain hidden the deadly nectar that poisons the lives and kills the relationships of all who consume the addictively delicious fruit of the serpent's tree. Let us consider the identity of the serpent's tree hidden in its name, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The terms good and evil are used without placing a value on either. The terms good and evil are not two separate and distinct realities that stand alone. The term "and" between the two terms does not separate them, it unites them like a hyphen together. The words good and evil are uttered unequivocally and without distinction, which can create a great spiritual deception among the learned who do not approach the text with wisdom and circumspection. It is not the knowledge of good. It is not the knowledge of evil. The serpent's tree is the good-evil tree. It is the knowledge of good-evil that it gives us. But you, being truly wise through grace, should know that what is simply said to be evil is not absolutely evil. It is evil in relation to something else, just as what is simply said to be good is not absolutely good, but is good in relation to something else. Note that Aristotle called things that are defined by their relationship a reciprocal relation. Aristotelian relatives are things that stand in relation to each other in such a way that the relation is constitutive of their identity. It is the relationship that constitutes and creates their seemingly separate identity. Such correlatives and are reciprocal and spontaneous, since the loss of either one will lead to the destruction of the other. Consequently, according to Aristotle, there are relatives for which being is the same as being somehow related to something. For example, the terms husband and wife are reciprocal terms. Neither term, nor more importantly, does neither reality exist separated from the other. Husband automatically implies wife. Equally, wife implies husband. Neither term and neither reality exist without the other. Separate and apart, the terms have no meaning and no reality. You cannot talk husband and it not imply wife. It's impossible. And vice versa. The same is true for good and evil. They are reciprocal. They are united together in such a way as husband and wife imply each other. You see, the chosen tree that we chose has only one coin. We can call heads or we can call tails, but there is only one coin being tossed into the air. It's the serpent's coin from the serpent's tree. It does not matter which side we choose, it's still the serpent's coin that we choose. Let that soak in. If the serpent can't get us to choose evil, tails, he deceives us into thinking that by choosing good, we somehow are pleasing God. In many cases, Satan, under the pretext of good thoughts, such as, well, in this way you can please God, suggests to a person and cunningly leads him astray into subtle and half-truths. Such a person does not know how to detect that he is secretly being seduced. Wow. The deception. God did not create us to be good. He created us to become like Him. Whether we are good or bad is the serpent's tree, not God's. The deception believes that by being good, we are becoming like God. The deception is believing that knowing the difference between good and evil, and then choosing to be good, makes us like God. This deception, that it is the possession of the knowledge of good and evil that makes us like God, implies that it is the knowledge of the good and evil that makes God to be God. The deception is that we have stolen. We are led to believe, or we are deceived, that we have somehow stolen the secret key to God's identity. And with this key, we can now assume God's identity for ourselves. We also now know the difference between good and evil. We believed the serpent when he told us, "You will be like gods, knowing good and evil." We believed and we chose to eat from the serpent's tree. Our deception is that we still believe the lie that by knowing the difference of good and evil is what makes God to be God. And now that we know that difference between good and evil ourselves, we have become like God by being good. This deception, number one, knowing the difference between good and evil, and number two, by then choosing to be good, will in turn make us like God, causes us to misread Genesis chapter 3, verse 22. Then the Lord God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us to know good and evil. And now lest he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. We believe that in 3:22 that God confesses that because Adam and Eve now knows good and evil, that Adam has indeed become a God like God is a God. If it is true that Adam has now become a God like God, then the serpent told them the truth in the first place, because that's what he said would happen. This is what the serpent had said would happen. This is why God told you, you can't eat of that. God had in fact told him to not to eat. He told you that because he knows when you do, you'll become like him. It's the knowledge of good and evil that makes somebody like God. That's why God doesn't want you eating that tree. Do you see the deception? Either God lied, don't eat that, it'll hurt you, or the serpent was telling the truth. If the serpent told the truth that becoming like God would make us like God, and now in that other verse, somehow God now admits, well, we got to get rid of him because he now knows good and evil, and it's going to make him into a God like us. Now that he's become like us, if that's how we understand all these verses, that's what happens because we believe the lie. I don't know if I can get it through to you, but if God doesn't want you to eat of that tree because he knows the day you do, you'll know the difference between good and evil and you'll become like him. Oh, well, that big, bad, mean God doesn't want me to become like him because he doesn't want me to know that. Well, I think I'll show him up. I'm going to eat of this and I'll become smart like him. I'll know the difference between good and evil. So we eat. And then you have God saying, well, now that he's become like us, knowing the difference between good and evil, we better kick him out of paradise unless something bad happens. If that's the end of the story, then Satan told the truth that God doesn't want you to eat of that because it'll make you like him because you're going to know good and evil. If then at the end God says he's now like us, he knows the difference between good and evil, we got to kick him out. Do you see how those two fit together? If you believe the lie, then that's how you're going to understand that last part of the story when God says it's happened, it's true. What Satan said was going to happen has happened. They become like us. We need to get rid of them. There it is in black and white in the scripture. The serpent in Genesis 3:5 saying, God knows this is what will happen when you eat from this tree. And God saying in 3:22, what the serpent told you would happen to you has happened. Therefore, I'm kicking you out of paradise. Who are we going to believe? We are faced with the same decision Adam and Eve faced. Who do we believe? Was Satan telling the truth? Is that why we're not supposed to eat from this tree? And is God verifying that that's the truth? Or was Satan telling a lie, and because we believe the lie, we have completely misunderstood what God is saying in the verse at the end? The saying goes, you can wait to make up your mind, but you can't wait to make up your life. How we live our lives shows what we believe. We don't believe with our heads, we believe with our feet. We choose the serpent's tree. We chose the serpent's tree. We chose to become our own God, build our own world based on the knowledge of good and evil. Well, I shot the clerk. Social media has made us painfully aware that emotion, tone, irony, and sarcasm are very difficult to communicate in an email or a text message. We've all been misunderstood sending somebody a text. An emoji was invented to supply the emotional tone and intent conveyed when speaking, but missing when we are writing it or texting. The smiley face, stuck in there to say, this is a joke. The story is told of a wife who found a beautiful necklace in Europe. She sent her husband in America a telegram about the necklace and its price, asking if she should purchase it. The husband wrote out his reply, no, price too high. When the wife returned to the United States, she proudly showed her husband the beautiful necklace. He was furious. He demanded an explanation. The wife responded, your telegram said I could. She pulled it out of her purse, and when he read it, it said, no price too high. The punctuation or the lack thereof altered the meaning of the same 4 words. Or consider the scene in the film My Cousin Vinny, when the sheriff is interviewing the homicide suspect. Sheriff, when did you shoot the clerk? Suspect, what? Sheriff, when did you shoot the clerk? Suspect, I shot the clerk. Sheriff, when did you shoot the clerk? Suspect, I shot the clerk. At this point, the sheriff is interrupted and he leaves the room. The suspect realizes that the sheriff believes he shot the clerk. Whoa, wait a minute! But the sheriff has left the room and doesn't hear him. So at the trial, the sheriff testifies the suspect confessed to having shot the clerk. When asked to read from his notes, the sheriff reads, Sheriff, when did you shoot the clerk? Suspect, what? Sheriff, when did you shoot the clerk? Suspect, I shot the clerk. Sheriff, when did you shoot the clerk? Suspect, I shot the clerk. The suspect had quizzically asked a question, I shot the clerk? With a question mark. The sheriff, however, had heard it as a statement, I shot the clerk, and wrote the suspect's comment with a period, not a question mark. Every fan of a Hallmark movie knows in every romantic comedy, when there is about 15 minutes left in the movie, a sudden conflict will occur to cause the couple temporarily to split up. At least 90% of the time the conflict occurs over an overheard remark, completely misinterpreted, or visually seeing something that is completely misunderstood. In a Hallmark movie, this obligatory conflict often comes across as weak and contrived by the writer of the script. Now, having reminded ourselves of subtlety and ambiguity of speech, those were all examples of it if you missed what we were doing. Let us now reconsider Genesis 3:22. The Lord God said, Behold, Adam has become like one of us to know good and evil, and now lest he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Do we correctly understand what we have just heard? Or like a cheap and contrived scene in a Hallmark movie, has the serpent deceived us into thinking it says one thing, when in fact that verse says something else entirely? We are the ones eavesdropping on a conversation in the Trinity and misunderstanding and misinterpreting what was said. We are the ones believing the lie of our misunderstanding, who break off our relationship with God and instead eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You see, it was the serpent who planted the seed of deception in verse 3:5. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. Adam and Eve believed the serpent, ate from the tree. In the aftermath, a conversation now takes place within the Trinity, in which the Trinity says ironically, behold, Adam has become like one of us. Or, if that's not clear enough, Adam thinks he's now like one of us. Silly man. Or, he thinks because he knows good and evil, he's now like us. Or, as if we would ever do anything based on whether it was good or evil. Or, I'm giving it all that's implied there. If you don't believe the serpent, then you can hear this in an entirely different way. What do we have to do with good and evil, Adam? That's the serpent's gig, not ours. Oh, Adam, how great is your deception? What makes you think you're like us when you don't even know who we are? You don't even know who you are, much less who we are. See that? The Lord God said, behold, Adam's become like one of us. He thinks he's like one of us. Isn't that ridiculous? You ever seen a little 2-year-old kid or a 3-year-old kid trying to walk around in their mother's shoes or their dad's shoes? He's like one of us, Jerry. We don't mean that. Look at the difference between him falling out of that pair of shoes. But we say that. But we don't mean it literally when we say that. Or if you've got someone in the family that smokes a pipe and the 3-year-old boy picks up the pipe and sticks it in his mouth. Oh, he's just like Papa. He's not. He thinks he is at that moment, but that doesn't make him into an adult behaving that way. We're eavesdropping. It is your deception that drives you out of paradise. You have chosen this tree, and it's now created your center of your world and your life. There is no paradise from that tree. It is your deception that placed the chosen tree at the center and now turns paradise instead into your good-evil world. And unlike a Hallmark movie, there is no quick fix. There's no happily ever after ending sealed with a kiss. So, thinking we're now like God, it is the choice to make the serpent's tree the center of our world that then has created this good-evil world in which we now live. Armed with our newly gained knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil, we are now suited for living in our new world that our choice has customized for us. We now live in the world we have chosen to create and live in. It is our world. We created it. We are the gods that created it. The serpent told us the truth. We have become like gods. The serpent's deceit was not in what we received, not in what we became. We received and became exactly what he said we would. He gave us what he said, but what he said is not what we thought he said. Ever bought something the same way? We thought, he said, we would become like God. We thought the serpent told us that God doesn't want us to eat from this tree because when we do, we will become like him. That is, we will become like God himself. However, the serpent deceived us. He did not say we would become like God, singular. He said we would become like gods, plural. In the Septuagint, Genesis 3:5 reads, and there it is, and if you notice at least when you're reading across the first line that's there, the third one over is God. It's bold, and if you look above it, you can see in Greek it's dark. The circle with a line across, eos, theos, the word for God. And then if you come over to the next page, the center line that goes across, you will become like, and I've got it boldened for you, the word gods, plural. And you look above it and you can see that it's a circle with a line through it, eoi, theoi, which is plural. You will become like gods. In the Septuagint, the singular term theos, God, is used for God himself, and the plural term theoi, or theei, is for what those who eat from the serpent's tree will become. We have not become like God. We have only become godettes, little gods, masquerading as God. The little boy smoking the papa's pipe. God mocks us when he says, mankind thinks they've become like us now that they have this good-evil knowledge. This deception has now crept into many contemporary English translations of the story in Genesis. Contemporary English translations have abandoned the original English translation of the King James of 1511, which did follow the Septuagint. Today's New King James Version, along with many other modern English translations, now translates Genesis 3:5 to read, you will become like God, singular, instead of you will become like gods, plural. Thankfully, the Orthodox Study Bibles correctly translates Genesis 3:5. You will not become like God. That wasn't what he said. You will become like gods. You'll become godettes. You'll become miniature gods. You'll become like play gods, pretend gods. And you get to create your own, like little kids out in the backyard having a tea party, making mud pies for real pies. We're pretending to create our world. That's there. And it's now that believing the lie is now, we're translating the Old Testament with that lie. The deception is that strong. We think that we lost paradise because God kicked us out because Satan told the truth. We became like him. Satan told the truth, all right. We just got faked out by it. We became godettes. God knows that on the day you eat of this, you'll turn into a godette. And we did. Knowing good and evil does not make us like God. It only makes us godettes of a good-evil world we now create. Being deceived, we do not know the difference between God and Godettes, between God and God wannabes. We mistake being a Godette for being God. How comical we must appear, parading around thinking we're God, while all along we are only little fools, thinking we wear the garments of divinity. We are naked little emperors wearing no clothes. Well, I think that's probably a pretty good time for a break. So we'll take a break. There's some goodies over there. Thank you for those that brought goodies tonight. We'll come back in a little bit and finish up. Thanks. We'll pick up where we left off. Creating our good-evil world. Godettes possess the eyesight, the perception, the knowledge of how to divide everything there is, the whole, into pieces. The pieces that produce pleasure are deemed good and pursued. The pieces that cause displeasure are deemed evil or bad and are avoided. The good-evil world is a world in which everything is divided and judged on whether it is good or evil, based on the pleasure or pain it gives to the one doing the dividing and the judging. The world was divided into the visible and the invisible, the sensible and the intelligible. The visible was sensible, the invisible was intelligible or contemplative. We have two ways of knowing, with our body and the senses, and how we know when we know without knowing how we know. The visible, sensible became the earth. We called it the earth. The invisible, intelligible became heaven. That's how we divided heaven and earth. We divided them rather than leaving them interpenetrated. Mankind inhabited the visible, sensible world of the earth. The gods dwelt in the invisible, intelligible world of heaven. Heaven was sacred, the earth was profane. We've just one example of how we divide everything. That which was pleasurable was pursued, pain was avoided. Personal pleasure led to having likes and dislikes. Likes became preferences. Preferences became habits. Habits became transgenerational. They passed from one parent to the child. Differences in preferences created divisions among persons, among tribes, among nationalities, among races. Preferences became rules. Rules became laws. Good behavior was rewarded. Bad behavior was punished. The good-evil world blessed those who did what was deemed good. It punished those who did what was deemed bad and evil. In a world created by little gods, the threat of pain and punishment became necessary to force people to be good, to conform to the accepted preferences that conform to the accepted norms, the accepted preferences of the person, group, tribe, or nation. Since the end of the Younger Dryas about 12,000 years ago, the last 10,000 to 12,000 years of Neolithic human history is filled with a variety of peoples, cultures, and civilizations, with each creating its version of a good-evil world. The courtroom of the United States Supreme Court contains two 40 feet by 7 feet marble friezes depicting a total of 18 great lawgivers of history, representing ancient Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Chinese, Greek, Israelite, Roman, Islamic, Western European, and American cultures. Included in the Supreme Court is Hammurabi, whose Code of Hammurabi is one of the oldest surviving set of rules in human history. From about 1754 BC, his code begins, and I printed it out for you there. It's got all that stuff, but if you go down to where it's in bold, right above it, and Bel called me by name Hammurabi, the exalted prince, who feared God, to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evildoers, so that the strong should not harm the weak, so that I should rule over the black-headed people like Shamash, and enlighten the land, to further the well-being of mankind. Not only is the Code of Hammurabi one of the oldest extant copies of ancient laws, it specifically admits its function is to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land and to destroy the wicked and the evil doers in order to further the well-being of mankind. We've got the good, the righteous, we've got the bad, and my job is to punish the bad so the good have it better. The Code of Hammurabi is indicative and representative of all legal and moral systems of rules defining human behavior as good or evil. All mankind has learned the knowledge of good and evil and has created its version of a good-evil world. At its heart, every good-evil world is a world based on pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain. British philosopher Jeremy Bentham created utilitarianism based on the principles of pleasure and pain. Bentham's successor, John Stuart Mill, explained that happiness is nothing but pleasure and freedom from pain, and that beyond pleasure and pain there is no good and evil. For over 10,000 years, mankind has created and given life to a world based on pleasure and pain. When Eve saw, perceived, and imagined the experience, that created the desire, I can see it, of how delightfully pleasurable the fruit would taste, she not only gave life to pleasure, she gave her life to be a life seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Ideas change the world only when they change our behavior. Adam and Eve created the good-evil world we all live in when they no longer simply thought about eating that fruit, but when they chose it by actually eating it with their behavior. They reached out and they grabbed it, and they physically embraced the serpent's tree to be the tree at the center of their lives and at the center of their children's lives and their grandchildren's lives. It is our behavior that seeks pleasure and avoids pain that we're talking about. Every one of us, everyone in the world takes for granted the world that we're all born into. This is normal. That's the world I grew up in my childhood. We take this reality for granted, thinking it is natural, inevitable, and immutable, unchangeable. We have forgotten this world we live in is a world created by choice. Believing our present world to be the norm, we envision a future based on the continuation of the past-present world that we're in. The cold hand of the past emerges from the grave of our ancestors, grips us by the neck and directs our gaze towards a single future. Therefore, we seldom try to shake ourselves free and envision alternative futures. We think the future will be like the past that we were raised in. Well, the law of Moses. 300 years after Hammurabi, Moses, Hebrew by birth, Egyptian by training, found himself on the backside of nowhere, tending his father-in-law Jethro's sheep. Out of the corner of his eye, something caught his attention. He noticed a bush flaming with fire, but the fire did not consume it. Moses chose to turn aside to investigate the mystery of a bush burning without being burnt up. When Moses approached the fiery bush, he did not investigate it, or examine it, or analyze it like a biologist dissecting a frog, or a medical examiner performing an autopsy. It was not the literal bush, nor the literal properties that kept it from being burnt, that occupied Moses' attention. The literal details of the bush were of little importance. It was the presence blazing forth and around the bush that had his full attention. Likewise, let us turn aside and consider Moses standing before the bush. For Moses and the bush, strictly speaking, even now continue to exist, for that which in the literal account took place in the past is always standing before us, being mystically present in our contemplation. The issue for us is not Moses, nor is it the bush. The issue also is not details of the story, nor the literal words of Scripture, other than how we pointed out, but even there, they're not an end in themselves. The issue for us is the same as for Moses, the one who is, in whose presence we now stand. It's not just that we learned a Greek word, or we saw theo and theos singular and theoi plural. That opens up to something larger than just an academic word lesson. The bush caused Moses to turn aside. The story in Exodus, these words of Scripture have caused us to turn aside. These words in Genesis have caused us to turn aside. But they are not the goal. They are not an end in themselves. They are the means, the tool that gets our attention, that causes us to turn aside, that we also might encounter the one who is, whose presence burns within the bush, the means, the tool by which we have turned aside. That's what the Greek lesson was all about. We turned aside. The bush is not the goal. The Bible is not the goal. Understanding the words is not the goal. It is not the oil in the lamp. It is not the wick in the lamp. It is the burning presence within the bush that draws us to the light within the lamp. We are surrounded by stuff filled with the burning presence. It is not ideas that change the world. It is our behavior that changes us, and we change the world. It was Eve's behavior to reach out, to grasp and take and eat the fruit that changed her and changed her world. If that's too allegorical, it is when we reach out and receive the presence into our lives and interact with that presence, that we are changed, not mentally, not academically, experientially. And our lives are changed little by little, inch by inch. We begin to be different in our behavior. It was Moses' behavior to turn aside, to look closer at the mystery that changed him. And he changed the world. In Cecil B. DeMille's movie, The Ten Commandments, Moses' wife Zipporah tells the Queen of Egypt, "You lost Moses when he went to look for his God. I lost Moses when he found his God." It was when Moses turned aside that he who is spoke to him. Mosaic law functioned for ancient Israel the same as law functions for all peoples and cultures. It provided order to human behavior and reduced one's exposure to risk. In a good-evil world based on pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain, people create rules for themselves that define good and acceptable pursuits of pleasure and punish evil pursuits of pleasure that bring pain to the group. St. Paul, an Israelite who called himself a Hebrew of the Hebrews, believed that the function of law itself, whether secular or religious, derived from God. The content of the laws might differ, but the function remained the same: to define good and acceptable behavior and to punish with pain unacceptable behavior. We call it law and order. Let me just quickly read together with us Romans 13:1. "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves." You're going against the rules of the society in which we find ourselves. "For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil." If you do the things that the law says do, you're okay. If you break the law, then you're in trouble. "Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain." He's going to come get you. "He is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil, as defined by the laws of whatever country we happen to be in. Therefore you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs are due, fear to whom fear is due, honor to whom honor." Every parent always has to teach our children, when you have that red light flashing behind you, stop. Don't run. Every day we see in the paper, here on the news, there's been another car chase, and the car flips and kills whoever was in the car. If the police are after you, stop. When you get out of the car, go to the ground. You don't say no, you don't say but. If you want to come home alive tonight, submit to the authority of the situation. That's good and evil. That's what it means. If you do good, you stay out of trouble. If you're in trouble, do good, get to your knees and yield. That's what good and evil is. It keeps us out of trouble. It reduces our risk, our exposure to risk, gives us a chance of coming home alive. We live in a good-evil world based on pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain. Even though this world we created is not God's world, no matter how much this world is fallen, nonetheless, this is still God's universe. God therefore ordained that mankind's good-evil world structure itself according to the preferences of the whole, lest mankind destroy itself in the chaos of individualism and anarchy, with each one pursuing their own pleasure and inflicting pain without regard to others or to the whole. The function of law imposes the collective preference of good and evil upon the whole. It's a fallen world. If we're not going to kill ourselves, and with marauders, we have to have some body saying this is right and this is wrong, and as long as we all agree and obey the right, we reduce our exposure to risk. The function of law imposes the collective preference of good and evil upon the whole. God ordains the function without regard to the content or the preferences. Mankind creates its own world with its own preferences of what are acceptable pursuits of pleasure and what are not. In the same way that God gave Adam and Eve the freedom to choose which tree would create their world, God gives the same freedom to choose to what they deem to be acceptable behavior in the world, the culture, and the society they are now creating based on that good-evil template and pattern. The problem, of course, comes is when one world decides to change into something else, and everybody else that's grown up in one world is at a loss as a brand new world is coming in around them. That mankind has the freedom to create its own laws, defining what it deems to be acceptable pleasure, acceptable behavior, in no way implies any divine endorsement of either mankind law or mankind's pursuit of pleasure or the pleasure mankind pursues. The function of law is to create order by imposing preferences of behavior on the whole and to reduce one's exposure to risk and death. In the pursuit of pleasure, an individual might try many things, some of which might risk injury, just your kids running down a flight of stairs, or death trying to outrace a train across a railroad crossing. If we obey the laws, first of all, we avoid being punished for not obeying them. Second, by obeying the laws, we fit in and are acceptable to the whole. Thirdly, by obeying the laws, we reduce our exposure to risk, injury, and death. Now, there are exceptions, but we'll deal with them perhaps next week. The Mosaic Law, like all laws, provided this basic function for ancient Israel. This was the purpose and function of the Mosaic Law. Religious preferences were included because they were deemed beneficial to the social order of the group and beneficial to reducing the exposure to risk to individuals within Israel, as well as reducing the risk to the survival of Israel as a whole. A corporate and personal relationship with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was deemed beneficial to their survival as a people. With its Mosaic law, the descendants of ancient Israel have survived as a people for over 3,400 years. Not only does the law of Moses provide the same function to its people that all other laws provide for their people, the law of Moses also shares another basic factor with all other laws. Laws do not give life. They reduce our exposure to death. They do not give us life. You search the Scriptures. You search the law of Moses. You search the Bible, Jesus said. For in them you think you have eternal, everlasting, timeless life. Keeping the rules may keep us from being killed. Keeping the rules may prolong our mortal life, may prolong this living in death that we call life. But keeping the rules does not, cannot, and will not give us life. Being good keeps us out of trouble. It does not give us life. Moses turned aside. He stood before the presence within the burning bush. From within the midst of the bush, the one who is revealed his presence to Moses. We stand before the tree we have chosen. We don't stand in front of that bush. We stand in front of the tree that we chose, the serpent's tree. The one who is reveals his absence to us. His absence reveals life is absent in this tree. He is absent in the keeping of the law. His absence reveals there is no life in this tree. There is no life in keeping the law. His absence reveals pleasure is not life, and pleasure does not give life. It does not bring us life. His absence reveals this: those who desire life, those who desire the one who is life, must seek him elsewhere. It is not in the keeping of the law that we find him. He who keeps only the law does not find him. He who keeps the law, by not finding him there, finds him by looking elsewhere. It is by practicing the commandments with knowledge, the knowledge that he is found somewhere else, that the Lord grants prosperity, teaching to them the function of the commandments, as well as revealing to them the true principles of being, the true principles of existence. The sixth Orthodox Psalm, Psalm 142, verse 8, that we say in every Orthodox service, verse 8 says, "Cause me to know the way wherein I should walk." We do not ask that verse to show us anything. We, in reading that verse, have the opportunity to come before the presence and ask him to cause us to know the way wherein we should walk. It is not in reading the Scripture and following those words. It is in those Scriptures bring us knowing there's no life in them. There is life in the presence surrounding them. It is when those words burn in us and we begin to just pray, not to the Bible, not to those words, not believing the book, but believing the presence of He who is, and crying out, "Cause me to know. I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I'm hard-headed, but in your gentleness, cause me to know how I'm supposed to live." Little by little, I don't know if I ought to do this or that. I don't know what direction to go. I don't know how I ought to behave. I don't know how to be a Christian. Cause me to know. That is a living relationship, standing in the presence of He who burns within the bush. He who burns within the words. They're not just empty words there. But until they burn, they are empty words. And we divide ourselves in a good-evil world, arguing over the words of the Bible, beating one another up, thinking there's life in those words. There is no life in the words of the law. There is life in He who is life. Well, I'm getting aside. Wizard, Santa, naughty or nice? In the film, The Wizard of Oz tells the story of Dorothy, her dog Toto, and 3 friends, each in need of something. Dorothy wants to return home. The lion wants courage. The Tin Man wants a heart. The Scarecrow wants a brain. The great and powerful Wizard of Oz promises to give each of them what they want if they will complete a series of tasks He gives to them. And having accomplished those tasks, Dorothy and her friends return to the great and powerful Oz to receive the things promised to them. And the great and powerful wizard is surprised to see them and tells them he must think about it and for them to return the next day. Dorothy and her friends protest, and in response to their protest, the following scene takes place. The wizard, that big screen and the smoke and the loud volume, do not arouse the wrath of the great and powerful Oz. I said, come back tomorrow. The little dog Toto, frightened by the wizards and this big screen, runs and hides behind a curtain. Dorothy shouts to the wizard, if you were really great and powerful, you'd keep your promises. And the wizard on the screen says, do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures, think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you an audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now. And at this point, Toto, over and wrapped in the curtain, pulls it back, revealing that the real Wizard of Oz, as a short, middle-aged man with blonde hair manipulating a machine, talking into a microphone. The Wizard Oz goes on the screen, oh, the great Oz has spoken, oh. And then he realizes the curtain's been pulled and he wraps himself inside the curtain, even though Dorothy and her friends have now seen the real wizard. And so the wizard keeps on stammering, pay no attention to that little man behind the curtain. The great and Oz has spoken. Dorothy now comes to the little old man and says, who are you? And the wizard now no longer on the screen, but directly says, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz. Dorothy, you are? I don't believe you. The Wizard of Oz, I'm afraid it's true. There's no other wizard except me. The Scarecrow, why, you humbug. The Cowardly Lion, yeah. And the Wizard of Oz, yes, that's exactly so. I'm a humbug. Dorothy stomps her foot. You're a very bad man. And the Wizard of Oz says, oh no, my dear, I'm a very good man. I'm just a very bad wizard. Dorothy and her friends find themselves in the good-evil world of Oz. They have been told if they are good, if they do what they're told to do, they'll be rewarded. They are angry and feel betrayed when they do not get what they were promised for being good. In the United States, we grew up singing, you better watch out, you better not cry, you better not pout, I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. He's making a list, checking it twice. Going to find out who's naughty and nice. Santa Claus is coming to town. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows when you've been bad or good. So be good for goodness sake. You see, we live in a man-made world where wizards, teachers, parents, policemen, preachers, and even Santa Claus tells us to be good. They promise us we'll get what we desire. And at some point in our life, like Dorothy, we discover the wizard is a fake. Keeping the rules does not give us life. Keeping the rules may keep us out of trouble, but being good does not give us life. Now, staying out of trouble and alive is a good thing, but it's not life. Ruby Sue reminds us in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation that life doesn't always come with a Hallmark ending. Clark. And if you believe in him, Santa Claus, and you believe in your mom, and you believe in your dad, and if you've been good all year round, Santa Claus is going to bring you something. And little Ruby Sue, sometimes I think all that Santa crap's just bull. If he was so real, how come we didn't get squat last year? We didn't do nothing wrong and we still got the shaft. It comes as a shock that being good doesn't make us ontologically good, nor does being bad make us ontologically bad. We can be a bad wizard without being a bad person. Well, there's a naughty or nice list. Like Santa Claus, every one of us has our list, our naughty or nice list. Every one of us has a set of standards by which we judge everybody else. I've made out one here. List number A. Let's see. Naughty or nice, we're looking at somebody judging their weight, their height. Naughty or nice on how they're dressed. Naughty or nice on the car they're driving. Naughty or nice on the career field that they're in. Naughty or nice on the size of their bank account. Naughty or nice on where they went to college, or did they go to college, or where they went to school. Naughty or nice on their political views. Wow. Naughty or nice on their religious doctrines. Naughty or nice on their choice of hair color. Naughty or nice on just how likable they are. Naughty or nice on their ability to do whatever it is they're trying to do. Naughty or nice on how old they are, and et cetera, et cetera. And I helped us out on our et cetera by giving us a list number B. Let's see, are they naughty or nice at being a good wizard, whatever that wizard in our life needs to be? Are they naughty or nice at being a good friend or a good singer? You know where I stand on that one. How about how good a cook they are? What, are they a decent actor or not? Naughty or nice? Naughty or nice as a mother? Naughty or nice as a father? Naughty or nice as a teacher? What kind are they? Or as a teacher or a preacher? Naughty or nice as a clerk that's waiting on me at McDonald's? You know my story. Naughty or nice as a son? Naughty or nice as a daughter? Naughty or nice as a good listener? Etc., etc. The list goes on and on. We judge everything about everyone. We live in a good-evil world. We judge everyone, and everyone judges us. We judge God. We judge the weather. We judge ourselves. There's absolutely nothing that escapes our judgmentalism. The good-evil tree is a tree of judgment. Well, that's where we're going to stop this evening. We've got one chapter left, and we will do that next week, and we will complete a brief little journey looking into the tree we chose, the tree that Adam and Eve chose, and we're discovering the world we created, the world we're living in, created by having the knowledge of good and evil. I look forward to finishing part 1. We said we were not going to take forever. This is not the Gospel of John. It lasted 2 years to get us through. And so we're moving at what may seem like a snail's pace to you, but probably feels like we're whizzing on by to already be done with part 1 in our session tonight. And so I look forward to finishing part 1 with you next week together. Thanks.